Hello, welcome back, everybody. Hi, Ina, Ryan. Thanks for joining again. We are just about to get started. Just a quick reminder, Joburg Photowalkers on Meetup. A great place to join if you're not part of Joburg Photowalkers. There's some really good photo walks being organized in the group. So you'll see it on the Meetup app. Just search for Joburg Photowalkers. I'll also put the details for the different WhatsApp groups, the MailChimp mailing list for this training if you want a reminder every week, and the meetup group for Joburg Photowalkers. I'll put all those links in the description of this video, so don't worry about it now. You can always afterwards come back to the video and find those links in the description. Great stuff. It's great seeing you all again. As with previous weeks with the training, anytime you've got a question, just pop the question in the chat. I will keep an eye on the chat and answer any questions as they come up. Good. What are we doing today? Today we are talking about 5 super tips for street portraits. We're going to start slow. I see there's still people joining, still people coming into the live. Yeah, but like I said, any questions, just pop them in the chat. Welcome everybody. We're just about to get started. This topic is really a topic that's close to my heart. It's, I would say, the type of photography that I enjoy most of everything that I do. So I enjoy the professional work, I enjoy the studio work, I enjoy events. All those things are really good. But for myself, if I just had to do one thing for myself without having to worry about doing it as a job, street portraits would probably be it. I love doing street portraits. It's just something I spend a lot of time doing, and yeah, I think everybody can learn something by doing street portraits, and that's what we're going to have a look at. I think also it ties in very nicely with Joburg Photowalkers. Going on photo walks, it's always a good opportunity to get some street portraits. And I think also it's something that might not come naturally to a lot of people. It also did not come naturally to me. It's not something that my personality is not perfectly suited to it. It took me a lot of practice. It took me a lot of trying to do street portraits. And over the years, I figured out how to do it. So, yeah, let's get started. I think everybody is in now. Hopefully, let me switch on this presentation. There we go. So we're talking about 5 super tips for street portraits. That's where we're going. So the first question we've got is, why street portraits? Why would we even do street portraits? What's the use of street portraits? Also, maybe, what is a street portrait? We can have a quick look at the definition as well, just so that we understand what we're talking about. So, what is a street portrait? For me, I feel that a street portrait is it's portraiture. So you're taking a portrait of somebody. So there's a person in the image. That's the first part for me. I've seen people put street portraits inside of street photography, although some other street photographers would split the two, basically saying that real, what they would classify as only street photography, would be more candid and capturing a moment as it happens, where a street portrait is more you're getting permissions, so it's a bit more posed and set up, and that's why they split the two. For me, it's definitely closely related to street photography, because you're walking around and you're also taking a portrait of a stranger, which is, in this definition, key for me. It's not somebody you know. It's not a model you booked. It's not a client that you're taking out in the street for a photo shoot. Although, if you have to work like this, if you've got a client interested in doing an outdoor shoot somewhere, I think street portraits will just up your game, and you'll be able to make a lot better portraits of your clients if you're a working photographer as well. or just family portraits or whatever when you're out and about in the city or at a different event or something. I think street portraits, if you practice street portraits, it will also make you better at all those things. But for me, the core of the definition of a street portrait is it's a stranger, it's somewhere out, it's at on the street or at an event or somewhere where you're not at like a location like a studio or your own home. You are interacting with a stranger and you're getting a portrait with their permission. I think that's pretty much how I would define it. Yes, next one. Street portraits, why is it good? Why is it good to do this? Well, firstly, you're interacting with a stranger. So if you want to get better at photography, especially if you're interested in photographing people, this is a really good skill. So if you can interact with somebody and come away with a good portrait, that's something to practice, and it's a really good skill to have as a photographer. And it depends on what genre of photography you're interested in. But anything related to people, I think doing street portraits would be of a benefit to you, because if you can interact with a stranger out on the street or out at an event, it would be so much easier if you may be doing a studio photo shoot with a client that booked you and looked at your work before and trusts you to make a good portrait. So approaching a stranger for a street portrait is almost sort of worst case scenario when it comes to being able to interact with somebody. So if you can get this going, if it will just benefit any people photography that you might do in other genres. Okay. I think it's absolutely good for you to do street photography. I think it's mentally good. It's good just getting out of the house. It's good walking around. It's good interacting with people. It's just overall, I think it's healthy. For me, it's just I have to do it every once in a while. I just need to go out for a walk. I need to talk to people that I don't know. And when I started doing this, it was really hard doing it. But now, once I've gotten comfortable with talking to strangers and approaching strangers, I sort of it's good. I think for especially after the last 2 years, just for mental health, getting out, talking to strangers, seeing that people are actually friendlier than you might think. That people are very often, when you approach a stranger for a street portrait, they are firstly friendlier than you think. Secondly, they're surprised that anybody would actually just talk to them randomly while they're going about their business. And it 99% of interactions are really, really good. So I think it's definitely good for you to do street portraits. Okay. Healthy in a way. So physically healthy, walking around, mentally healthy, or just to interact with people. Then, yeah, lastly, I think in a lot of different ways, if you practice your street portraits, your photography overall is just going to get better. You're looking for light, settings on your camera, interacting with people, getting them to maybe just turn a little bit, do something that that helps the portrait a little bit. So yeah, I think the skills that you learn doing street portraits can be applied to other types of photography. And let's say you do something like wedding photography. There's only 52 weekends in a year, so probably if you're a wedding photographer, you're not most likely not doing more than 50 weddings a year. So there's only 50 chances of practicing what you do and to get better. But any day of the week, you can go out for a walk and do some street portraits, and by that way, just like improve your photography a lot faster than just waiting another week or two for the next booking. Okay. So I think a lot of street photography and street portraits, the big advantage is that you can improve your photography any time of the week, and you can do it a few times of the week if you really want to get some practice in. And you don't have to wait for a client booking to improve your photography or any other event to come along. You can just go out and practice it. Okay, next. Let me see if there's questions. Any questions? Just pop questions in the chat if you've got a question so far. I'm going to keep an eye on the questions, and hopefully also on the WhatsApp. That's a little bit harder for me to do, but I'm going to try and do that as well. Good. Let's hop into my next slide. So, tip number 1, be nice. When you're out and about in the city, when there's people going about their thing, whether they're on their way to a meeting, on their way to work, I have to say one of my favorite times to do street portraits is actually during the week. I think on weekends people are in a bit of a different mood. And during the week, you find people that are maybe in the afternoon, they're on their way back home from work. They've had a full day. They may be dressed up nicely. Also, in the mornings, earlier in the mornings, people are on the way to work. And I think it's, for me, just a nice time to do street portraits. But depending on your neighborhood, depending on where you like to go and do street portraits, it might be different. Okay, so yeah, the very first one is just be nice. Life is too short to irritate people, to make people angry. A photo is not worth spoiling somebody's day over it. So if somebody's in a bad mood, let them go. If you ask somebody for a photo and they say no, just leave it. It's not worth it. You'll spot the next person who's interesting and is looking good. That's just one thing that I've learned over the years is respect people. If you ask somebody if you can take a portrait or if they've got a minute or two, if they say no, there's probably a reason. They might be late for a meeting, whatever. Just don't push it and just accept the answer. If somebody says no, then leave it. Okay. Then the next thing with being nice is what I would often do is I would have a business card close by. Or what I also have is on most of my cameras that I use for street photography, I've actually got a little sticker. I don't know if you can see there in the corner. I've got a sticker under the flippy screen. So it's got my website details on it, contact details on it. So if I'm in a bit of a hurry and doing a street portrait, I would, and somebody needs my contact details, they can just take a photo of that sticker that's on the back of my camera. I don't have to fumble through my pockets for business cards or anything. But if somebody hasn't got their phone with them or their phone died, I might just give them a business card. It's all good. I generally wouldn't, as when I approach somebody, I wouldn't offer them a photo. But if we're chatting and we're having a good chat and I'm taking some images and they mention anything about it, then I would offer to send them the image. I don't try to persuade them to get their portrait by offering them a professional headshot or something. I'm not trying to bribe anybody. So when I approach somebody, I would say something like, "Oh, you're looking really cool today. I'm out about taking some street photos. Do you mind stopping for a portrait? Have you got a minute?" If somebody says yes, then in the discussion, I might then afterwards offer to send them the photo if they contact me. I always give them my contact details and leave it up to them to contact me. So if they do, then I will send them the image absolutely for free because they gave their time on the street in their busy day for me to have a portrait. Then as part of this, a street portrait sort of implies consent when it comes to a portrait. So some other street photography, people might not agree to have their image taken or their photo taken. But if somebody stops for a portrait and they smile for the camera, obviously there's implied consent there. So you don't really have to get anything more than that. Like I said, I just give them my contact details. And that's part of just being nice. Like, don't try to gain something from the interaction. It's somebody that's actually giving up their time. They're looking good. They're on their way somewhere, and you're interrupting their day. So be nice about it. Have a nice discussion with people. And like I said, if it comes up, offer to send them the images. Sometimes they ask, "What are you going to do with it?" In that discussion, I would just tell them that it's just street photography. It's for my own work. It's not going to go anywhere on ads or something. And if you want one, I'll send it to you. I might also, once in a while, somebody would, while I'm there, open my website and they can see some examples of my work. That sometimes helps as well. But in this whole discussion, I'm not really trying to persuade somebody. Usually, when somebody's looking good and they've got a few minutes, they will say yes, and they'll be happy to pose for a portrait. Okay. So don't make people angry. Life's too short for that. Don't spoil people's day. Don't exploit people just for a photo. If somebody's having a bad day, if somebody's not looking good, don't approach them for a street portrait. What's the use of that? It might get some likes on social media because you're showing somebody who's like looking really bad or whatever. But for me, there's nothing to gain from that. I For a couple of likes on social media, it's not worth it. I'm not going to spoil somebody else's day. I'm not going to try and take a photo of somebody having a bad day. If somebody is down and out on their luck, it's not for me to take that portrait. I like to show people in the best possible way. I like to make the best possible portrait of somebody. If the opportunity is there, I will also give them a copy of that. And I want to brighten up somebody's day. I want to compliment somebody. If I take my time and my skills and make a portrait of somebody, it should be a compliment. It shouldn't be me trying to gain something from it. Okay, so that's my way of seeing it. I think and I've seen some photographers post images on social media where it's about somebody who's in a really bad place. We've got plenty of that in South Africa, and I think if you're working for an NGO and that's part of your assignment to shine a light on these sort of topics or subjects, then obviously you need to do that. Somebody needs to do that. If you're working for an NGO, if you're working for a news agency, then it's a different story. If it's about unemployment, if it's about homelessness, if it's about any of these topics, I think it's not for a normal street photographer to cover these. I think you should either be covering it as part of an NGO or a news agency. If there's something that bothers you and you want to change something, go talk to a news agency, to go talk to an NGO that's busy with these things, and offer your photography services as part of that. But just taking a photo to get some clicks or likes or something on social media, I don't think is generally the right thing to do. So for me, when I'm doing a street portrait, I'm looking for people who are having a good day in that case. So yeah, that's just still being nice. Okay, so don't exploit people just for a photo. It's not worth it. Then keep to the law with street photography. Obviously, there's some laws in our country. Just keep to them and keep to your ethics as well. There's some things that are legal with street photography, but you're not being a nice guy if you're doing it. So, yeah. If you're taking a photo trying to make somebody look as good as possible, then I think you're in the right mindset. If you want interactions with nice people, you're in the right mindset. Don't go out there to try and make a shocking photo or something. That's not what it's about. Street portraits is still part of portraiture, and I think making a good and honest portrait of somebody, making them look as good as possible, is what it's all about. Next, tip number 2. Embrace the shadow. So this is a bit of a more of a technical little tip. When it comes to normal street photography, when it comes to candid street photography, when you're looking at like shadows and light and angles and different things in the city, harsh light, middle of the daylight is usually very nice, and you can get some really cool effects, and you can do some silhouettes and all sorts of things. But when it comes to street portraits and you want somebody to look good, shadows are your friend. Especially in the city, one of the best places to do a street portrait is in what's called direct shade. So direct shade is basically shade next to sun. So even if it's in the middle of the day, you can make a beautiful portrait. Just make sure you are in the shade of a building. So there's plenty of tall buildings. If you're on a sidewalk on the right side of the street, you've got shade right there, and usually a couple of meters away, you've got full sun. You've got sun bouncing off buildings for nice full. You don't need to have any lights. You don't need to have a flash. There's plenty of beautiful light, even in midday in the city. Just find a bit of shade, and you are good to go. The other thing when it comes to street portraits is if you need to do it, and somebody's face is in shadow. So let's say it's midday, I'm not close to a building, there's somebody who looks really nice, I need to get a portrait of them. I might very often turn, and basically I don't ask somebody to really turn around or pose or anything, because I think for a street portrait I want something that they just do by themselves, like this guy on this photo. He was just standing like that when I asked him for a portrait. What I did is I moved like 2 steps to one side, just to get him framed with the wall behind him and not with the sky. The sky was really bright, it was midday sun, so I moved 2 steps to one side, and he obviously just followed me. He looked straight at my camera. So just with me moving 2 steps, I got what I needed. And if you need to blow out some highlights, this is the one time I think you're not doing cityscape, you're not doing landscape, you're not doing architectural photography. If your highlights blow out in a little somewhere in the image, I think the main thing here is you need the exposure on somebody's face to be correct. So you want their eyes to be correct. You want to see detail and expression on their face. So every once in a while, especially in midday, you will find that you're going to be blowing out part of the background. It's not the worst thing. For a street portrait, like I said, it's about the person. It's not so much about the sky in the back there. It's not a landscape photo. So this is the one time I think in photography where every once in a while, exposing correctly for somebody's face, you will find that you blow out some highlights, and it's not the worst thing. Okay. In a case like that, what I very often do, because the sunlight is very harsh, if somebody is out maybe in the middle of a parking lot, there's no shade, and I stop them right there, I'm not going to ask them to walk somewhere else. I'm respectful of their time. And what I would do is I myself would just walk sideways or around them to get the sun behind them. So basically their face is in the shade, in their own shade. So that because the sun is behind them, the light is shining from behind, their face is basically in the shade. It's their own shade that they create with basically the back of their head, because the sun is behind them. Then I don't worry too much about the highlights, and I just expose for their face and I get that portrait. It works very well, and you don't get harsh shadows and weird things on their face with direct sun shining on it. Okay. Good. The other little tip, most modern digital cameras, DSLRs, mirrorless, whatever brand you shoot, there's some way of compensating for dynamic range if you're shooting JPEG. So in Fuji, it's called DR200, DR400. There's active D-lighting. I think that's on the Nikons. So you've got all these different ways that you can get a little bit of extra dynamic range. It's worth switching that on if you're going out in the middle of the day. It will just darken down the highlights and open up the shadows a little bit. Then also, if your camera allows it, most digital cameras do already for quite a few years, you can lift your shadows a bit and drop your highlights in the shadow highlight adjustment. Sometimes it's a little graph where you can change the curves. Sometimes it's just numbers, and you need to know which way to go on the numbers. I know Fuji, for instance, works the opposite way than some other cameras, but basically what you want to do is you want to darken down your highlights and open up, like brighten up your shadows. Especially for street portraits, this works really well. Okay, good. Next, this was embrace the shadows. Yes, good. Next one, portrait versus environment. Okay, so this is tip number 3. We're going quite quickly, but if you've got any questions, just stop me anytime. So portrait versus environment. What are we getting at here? Sometimes, like the previous image we had, to me, the guy was on his way to work. He looked really nice. He had a nice hat on, and it was about him. He was really friendly. His facial expression was friendly, and I needed to I really wanted to get a nice portrait of him, also to give him if he wanted it. So I basically stopped him. I moved a little bit just to get the background the correct way that I wanted it, took the portrait, and it was a really close-up portrait. So in that case, to me, it was all about the person and the portrait. Then every once in a while, you'll be in a situation where you're doing a portrait, but the environment is also important. Okay, so the environment needs to be in the image, and it's part of the story, and you want to show somebody in that environment. So either it is somebody in a specific place where the place is relevant, you want to show that it's somebody in the CBD of Johannesburg, so you want to feel for the buildings and you want to show some of those buildings, or it's somebody like this guy in this image. He's selling the books there out of his car. He's got a car full of books. He's got some books on top of the car, and this background is part of the story. I don't need the whole car. I don't need all the books, but I need some of that in the portrait. So then obviously I'm not blurring backgrounds for portraits like this. I want the backgrounds also to be at least semi in focus, maybe not as crisp and sharp as the person themselves, to not be too distracting, but I want the background to be there, just to complement and tell a bit of the story. Okay. So then it becomes an environmental portrait, because the environment is part of the portrait. It's not only a close-up headshot, but it's telling a bit more of a wider story. So basically, when you meet somebody on the street, when you're talking to somebody, you need to decide: is it just about the person, or is what's happening around them also important, and should you include that in the street portrait? And both ways could have a really good effect. Oh, we've got a question. What is it called in Canon? So Canon active lighting, I think, something like that. Not sure. I haven't used the Canon in quite a while, but they definitely have it in Canon DSLRs, mirrorless. I think it's something like active lighting. That will already give you a little bit more dynamic range. It does not apply to shooting RAW. It's only if you're shooting JPEG. RAW has already got that extra dynamic range, so you don't need it, but it will give you a bit more range if you're shooting JPEG, which I like doing. Yeah, and then you can adjust shadows and highlights as well to get even more. Okay. Yeah, just getting back to these ones, just ask yourself the question: is it about the person only, or is the setting or the environment also important for this portrait? Okay. Then another thing that when we're talking about environments and going out and getting these sort of portraits, if a little tip, if you're just getting started with street portrait, sometimes it's really hard just going out in the street, walking around and asking people for portraits. You need a bit of self-confidence, and a lot of, well, some people say no, and you need to be fine with that and respect that and tell them to have a great day, and yeah, and cheers, and enjoy your day. It happens, and you shouldn't feel rejected or anything about it. People have got their stuff to do. Some people are in a hurry. Some people are in themselves not confident of what they're looking like on that day. You might think they're looking awesome. They might think that they're not dressed well that day, and on another day they might say yes. So it could be intimidating just walking around in the street and asking people for portraits. So a couple of tips. First one is to make it as easy as possible on yourself. Maybe start out at events where photography is allowed. So whether it is a fashion sort of event, like a fashion week or something, whether it is a parade or a market, or a music event or a sport event, any of these events that might happen where there's lots of people together, if photography is allowed, it's a great place to get to practice your street portraits. You can approach people, you can ask them for portraits. Generally, people are dressed up, they're looking good for a lot of these events. They're comfortable, they might not be in a hurry if it's something like a market. And another tip is, let's say there's a fashion event in a certain area and you want to get some street portraits. Focus on what's around the event. Don't go to the main stage, whether it's a sport event or a music event or whatever it is. Don't focus on the entertainment or what's happening on the stage or anything like that. Hopefully other photographers are covering that. Look at the people going, leaving the venue, like out on the street, going towards the venue. Sometimes you find people that really take some time to dress up, whether it's for a sporting event or a fashion event or whatever, and they're feeling confident, and you can get them on sort of on the periphery of events, whether it's a market or a parade or whatever. Sometimes the people looking at the parade or whatever is going down the street are more interesting than the parade itself. So focus on the people and interact with the people, chat to them, and they're generally in a good mood and dressed well, and they would generally be easier to get to say, yeah, they would just be happier to have a portrait taken than just somebody on their way to work, for instance. So read somebody's body language, read the situation, know where you are, and you'll increase your chances of getting good street portraits. Okay. Next, we'll have a look at a couple of examples of more environmental portraits. So the first guy is sitting on his car. I don't need the whole car to tell the story, but this guy bought this car a while ago. I had a chat with him because I liked the car. I remember it from when I was small. Was Yeah, it's just a cool car. I had a chat to him. He was very proud about his car and talked about the car. And I said, "Can I take an image of you with your car?" And I also ended up sending it to him. So the car is part of the story. I don't need the whole car in there, but it just gives a little bit of context to the guy with his car with the minibus taxi in the back. So this is not just a portrait. There's a bit of environment included. Then the next one, in Joburg CBD in Marshalltown. So in the corner there, this lady was walking there in the town. There's some buses, and the background, the bus, the buildings, it's all part of the story. So again, a bit of a wider portrait, including some of that background, just to give you an idea of where it is and give you some context in that environmental portrait. Then the next guy, he's got some key cutting machines or something. I saw him out in the street outside his shop. I started talking to him because I liked his hat. And in the end, he just stepped into his own shop. And in front of one of his machines, I made the portrait. So again, it started off as what could have been just a street portrait of a guy with a nice hat. But it ended up with a portrait of him in his workplace, doing what he loves doing. And yeah, it just gives a bit more context. And again, I sent him this image. I actually printed one for him and gave it to him. So, and don't think that I mentioned giving people images. I would say less than half the time people actually ask for an image, and even then, when I give my contact details, some of those people don't even contact me. So it's not that I'm offering somebody an image, professional image or something, to try and get them to pose for a portrait. I chat to them and get them to pose, and then if it comes up in the discussion, or if I feel they might benefit from it or something, then I offer it. Yeah, but generally I don't offer it when I'm asking for the portrait. It only happens later. Anyway, it's just so that that's clear. Yeah, so some more environmental portraits. Then my next tip number 4. Sometimes you need to get close, and this works in a couple of ways. But the very first thing is you need to see people's faces. We humans, we identify with people. There's something that when we see somebody's face, there's a connection. When we see somebody's facial expressions, when somebody is smiling, when you're looking at somebody's eyes, well, sometimes in the city people wear sunglasses, but in some of these portraits, when you see somebody's eyes, there's a connection there, and it's human. And I think even from when we're really small, we spend a lot of time looking at people's faces, looking at people's facial expressions, and it's important. And so there's a definite place for what we saw on the previous point when it comes to environmental portraits about the environment and telling the story of what's happening. But I think just as powerful as having that environment, or even more so sometimes, is getting close and getting a close-up portrait of somebody. So sort of a headshot sort of image. Okay. So what this also does is, you're close to somebody, you can talk to them, you can interact with them. We've all seen these like some fashion photographers or whatever that shoot with a 200mm lens, and they're on the other side of the beach, and they walk to the model and they tell them what to do, and they walk to the other side of the beach using a 200mm lens, shooting the shot, shouting at them sometimes. If it's a professional model, if it's a professional shoot, that's a different story. They need to get the result, and obviously they've got their way of working. But when you're interacting with somebody on the street, you want to be close to them. You want to be maybe 2 meters away or something, just to be able to have a conversation, to build a bit of trust, to chat to somebody, ask them how their day was. It's that interaction is valuable, and every single street portrait I've got and that I like in my collection is something where I remember the people, I remember the interactions, I remember the smiles, I remember the jokes. and it's awesome. So that's part of it. So get close so that you can have an interaction. Don't try and be far away, pointing a long lens at somebody. That's firstly uncomfortable. It's a little bit creepy in the street if you do that, and you don't get the chance of really connecting with somebody and getting like honest facial expressions if you're not close enough to them to get that shot. Okay. So yeah, get close. For me, this means we'll get to gear now, and we'll discuss that in gear. I see we've got a question about what lens. So what lenses I use for street photography. We'll get to that. We'll get to what gear. That's the next point. Yeah. So get close. Eyes are important. Build a connection. That connection, that time you spend talking to somebody, asking them how they're doing, asking them where they're going, are they having a good day, how was their weekend. That time you spend, you will see it in that portrait at the end. Just respecting somebody, making them feel important, because taking a portrait of somebody is it should tell somebody that they're important enough that somebody is stopping and asking them to take a portrait. So yeah, I think it's absolutely take the time, get close, make sure you get a close headshot of somebody, but spend the time with them, build that connection. Okay. And like I said, don't use long telephoto lenses if you're doing street portraits. Leave them for the professional jobs, leave them for the weddings and the fashion shoots. You don't want to be using any big long lenses. It's intimidating. It doesn't build that connection with somebody. And also, when I'm out taking a portrait like this, most of the time my camera is down and I'm talking to somebody. I pick it up for 2 shots once I know. And while I'm talking to them, I'm thinking maybe, okay, I need to step 2 steps to this side, but I'm still talking to them, similar to what I would be doing in a studio with a client. I'm talking to people most of the time, not pressing the shutter button most of the time. Okay, getting somebody to be confident and relax is more important than having 100 photos of somebody. Okay, so next. Minimalist gear. I think for me this is important. And I've seen people go different ways with street photography and street portraits, but for me having minimalist gear is just it makes my enjoyment of the day more if I don't have to lug around a lot of kit. I think it's less intimidating to somebody on the other end of the camera if I don't have a big long lens on there. And so I prefer having just the bare minimum. I can walk around. Just for me, it's easier. So that's getting back to the question we just had. If you're doing general street photography, a lot of people would say anything from maybe a 28 to a 35mm lens. And that's for general street photography, sort of candid street photography, stuff happening in the city, candid shots of people. And with the 35mm, you could have a nice environmental portrait of somebody. So if you want to include the environment, if the environment around people is important, 35mm will still do. Round about there, it's pretty wide. And if you want a close-up headshot, unfortunately with something like a 35, you are right up in somebody's face with your camera. So I wouldn't recommend 28 or 35 for close portraits. Okay, if you want some more environment, good, those are fine, and you can do all sorts of street photography with those. Personally, my absolute favorites for street photography and street portraits would be either a 50mm or an 85mm. So getting closer to what would be considered either a standard focal length or a portrait focal length. I don't ever go above 85 or around about 85. So I've got one lens that ends up being a 90mm equivalent that I do love. It's a really nice lens. But I don't use anything over a 90mm for street portraits because I find that then I'm too far away from people and I can't really interact with them and chat to them. I like to be close enough to talk to somebody. I don't like to push my camera in somebody's face to get the shot. So a 50 or an 85 is generally 2 good lenses for being just far enough away to get a nice headshot, but not being too far away to shout at people or not build a connection. So those two would be my favorites. And the good news is, in pretty much any camera brand, your 50mm or 50mm equivalent, your Nifty 50, is usually the cheapest lens in the whole range. And a normal, something like in Nikon or Canon, the 50mm f1.8, even the cheapy plasticky one, they are amazing lenses. They are absolutely way more than what you need for doing street portraits. You don't need f1.2 or whatever, f1.4 lenses for street portraits. Getting some of that environment included is actually nice. Getting close to somebody with a 50mm f1.8, you can absolutely completely blur the background if you need to. So that's the good news. One of the cheapest lenses that you can buy for your camera is generally a really good one for street photography. Also, a lot of the very famous street photographers, when street photography started, they used 50mm lenses. It's a relatively recent thing that people have moved to wider 35s and 28s. A lot of the original street photography that we see as like some of the pioneers of street photography would have used like a 50mm equivalent. Yeah, so yeah, that's getting back to the lenses. Like an 85 or a 90 thereabouts is nice. It's a bit more of a portrait lens. You can be like one step away and still get a really close portrait. It's nice lenses to have, but they tend to be a bit more expensive, and it's not really needed. Also, if you're doing street photography and you've just got whatever entry-level DSLR or whatever you've got with a kit lens, the 18 to 55 equivalent kit lens, whatever you've got, Nikon, Canon, Sony, Fuji, Panasonic, Olympus, whatever you've got, that lens that came in the box with your camera, usually the one that's in full frame equivalent, an 18 to 55, that's fine for street photography, for street portraits. It's actually, there's a little trick. You can go all the way to 55 and get a nice portrait, and you can go all the way to the 18 side and get a nice environmental portrait. So it's not, they're usually quite light, small lenses, not the best build quality, but for street photography, they're nice and small and not intimidating. The normal kit lenses are amazing. You can really use them for street portraits and street photography. Portrait like this one that you see here, you could easily do with a normal little kit lens. Okay. We've got another question. If you need to capture two people in your shot, almost like a couple shot, what f-stop do you recommend so that one of them is not blurred? So generally, okay, let's put it a different way. A lot of photographers, let's say you're doing an outdoor shoot for a client and it's maybe on the beach or in a park or a sunset shoot. A lot of photographers, maybe wedding photographers as well, they would tend to shoot wide open. So lowest f number you can get. If the lens can do f1.4, they're at f1.4 and they're blurring everything in the background and they're creating a mood, sunset or wedding or whatever it is. And that's one way to do portraits. And it's for a very specific reason they're shooting like that. They want the backgrounds to disappear. Where if I'm out in the street, if I'm out in the city and I'm talking to people, I might not want the background to completely disappear. This portrait there is an example. This guy was playing his guitar out on the sidewalk, and the background is part of the scene. What I did do is lower myself a little bit so that there's not, there was a building behind him. You can't see the building, so his body is now hiding the building. I just lowered myself a tiny bit so his head is framed up against the sky. So I would rather move a bit to get a piece of not distracting background, either sky or a wall or something that's not distracting behind somebody and not completely blur it out. So most of the time, even with one person, I might be shooting at, let's say, somewhere between f2.8 and f4, maybe even f5.6 if I'm very close to somebody, to still get some of that background in the image and not just get rid of it. So even if I have to do a couple, f4 to f8 is very safe. You could do a couple if they're sort of next to each other and faces are close to each other, even at something like f2.8, f3.5. So yeah, generally I don't shoot wide open when I'm out in the street doing street portraits, so it's that like focus is not critical. Sometimes I use manual focus lenses as well, so I'm generally not at the lowest the lens can do. Couples are fine. If one is behind the other one, then I would um, close down, stop down the aperture maybe to what 5.6 or something, just to get everybody in focus. But if they're next to each other, faces close to each other, then like anything from f2.8 and smaller is good. Next question. What about 18 to 135 crop lens? Yeah, 18 to 135 is a good lens. It might be a little bit bulkier and bigger than an 18 to 55. If it's not too big, it depends on the brand and the spec of the lens and what aperture it can do, how fast the lens is. But an 18 to 135 will be fine. I would generally not go over maybe 80 mil or so, 85 mil when I'm doing street photography or street portraits. But the lens can definitely do it. It's more about how big is it, how bulky is it, and how intimidating is it. So I like people to be at ease. So I generally prefer smaller lenses when I'm talking to people. Okay. So for me personally, when I'm going out, one camera, one lens. I pick before. So sometimes I pick a 40 mil, sometimes I pick a 50 mil, sometimes I pick a 90 mil. Those are my three favorite lenses. Once in a while, I've got a 75 equivalent as well, but anything from 40 to 90. I would pick a prime lens, put it on the camera, and just take that one lens for the day. It might depend on which area I'm going to or what idea I've got for photos for the day. But it would be one of those. If I'm going to something like an art exhibition, open studios the other day, going to different artists' studios, and I'm going to be taking indoor portraits of people in there where they work, I prefer something like a 40 mil just to get a little bit more of what they're busy with. If I'm going to be outdoors and doing just portraits of people, I would usually go for something maybe like a 75 to 85, just to get nice close headshots in that case. But anything from about 40 to 90 would do. Just pick one, take it. There you go. One camera, one lens. Just makes things easier. I do take an extra battery. I do take an extra SD card. Those two things. Just I never know how long I'll be out. Some days are good and I stay out longer. And the extra battery and the extra SD card, they would come in handy. Okay. Oh, and just another tip. If you're taking a portrait lens out on the street and you're doing street photography with a portrait lens and you're doing street portraits, and then you see a beautiful city scene and you need something a bit wider, phones are generally good for just getting one wider shot in between the other stuff. Phone lenses are quite wide, and then at least you get something else as well. Good. Next one. Yeah, so if you are used to street photography, if you do a lot of candid street photography, if you've done a lot of street photography previously, doing a street portrait, you might go for a lens that's a little bit more narrower than what you are used to. So if you are used to 28 to a 35 for street photography, maybe try a 50. It will help you with your portraits, just getting a little bit closer to some and getting a closer crop on a headshot and not being like camera inside somebody's face. Okay. Kit lenses are fine. No long telephotos. So that's not great. Okay. That is tip number 5. Then we get 2 questions. Any questions? Just pop them in the chat. We've got a question. When are we doing a Joburg CBD walk? I love Joburg CBD walks. One of my favorite things to do. Yeah. I know there's different views about Joburg CBD, but it's still one of my favorite places to do street photography. Most of the images that you saw tonight were all Joburg CBD. But having said that, one of these images that you saw tonight was actually out in Parys in the Free State, small little town. So don't think that you can't do street photography in small towns or suburbs or wherever, your local park, wherever it's safe and where you feel comfortable going and where other people feel safe and comfortable. Yeah. We've got another question. Long exposure tips for night street photography. Well, long exposure and street photography is very interesting. So, if you're doing cityscape, obviously you can do long exposure. If you are doing normal street photography, like candid street photography, sometimes just dragging the shutter a little bit, maybe a 30th of a second. So just like a slower shutter that you're used to, and getting people to just blur a bit. Maybe you're at a bus station, train station, places like this. Just showing that motion where people are a little bit blurred, but they're still there. You can't make out their features or anything. They're like sort of ghost images. That's a nice thing to do sometimes. But this falls more into like general regular street photography, candid street photography, where you would do this. You can also do longer exposures and do panning with bicycles going past, motorcycles going past, whatever you want to do. But again, not really for portraits. If you're doing portraits, you need fast shutter speeds. If you're doing portraits at night, you need to find the light. Shop windows, anything that creates some light, you need to get close to that. If there's light on a sidewalk coming from a shop windows are generally quite good. And then just having a fast prime lens, that helps, because you can't really go long exposure with people if it's a portrait, because they will move and you'll get blurry portraits. So yeah, long exposures for normal street, definitely something to try out in different conditions, but not for portraits. Cool. Next question, black and white versus color. This is a good question. So a lot of the famous street photographers that I like, and I've got some of their books here with me. A lot of my inspiration comes from street photographers who worked in black and white. Now, most of them used black and white film because that's what they had. There was no color. So because I like a lot of the pioneering street photographers and like some of the real classic older street photographers that worked in maybe Paris and even New York to some extent, but a lot of the work that I like were done in Europe. So in those times when they did those, they didn't have a choice. It was black and white. And maybe because I've been looking at a lot of those images, I like it. I've gotten used to it. I've gotten used to the light and the shadow and what you can do with black and white. So I like black and white personally. I do color street photography in between. I've got some portraits that I like that are in color for different reasons. Sometimes the color is part of the story. But for some reason, personally, I like street portraits in black and white. I think it focuses the attention on the person and not so much on what they're wearing. There's an old quote that a photographer once said, a color photo is about what somebody's wearing, a black and white photo is about the person. I think it can go many different ways. I just like black and white personally. The other thing is, for professionally, for my work, I shoot mostly color. So probably 95% of what I deliver to clients for work would be color work, because there's products and fashion and all sorts of things involved there, which means it has to be color. So getting the chance by myself with my own work to shoot black and white, I enjoy it, and I think it teaches me a lot about highlights and shadows and where shadows fall on people's faces and how to get light into their eyes and all sorts of things that's easier to focus on in black and white than in color. The color can sometimes distract and you miss something like where a shadow is or something. So yeah, that's yeah. I really like shooting black and white, and I think it makes me a better photographer, being able to look at the shapes and the highlight areas and the shadow areas, and ignore the color. So it's one less thing to think about. But then for work, I do a lot of color. So I've got nothing against color. I just enjoy doing it for myself in black and white. Next, got a comment saying the portraits are amazing. Thank you. The people were amazing, that I can tell you. Like really friendly people. I just enjoy doing these. Next, why do security guards always say photography is not permitted, yet it is permitted with a cell phone? Well, it depends on where you go. I've found some places where you can go inside venues and places where they're happy with cameras. Once in a while, you find that a marketing team or a management team at a place or a venue or something understands that photos will actually promote their business. If you allow people at maybe a market or an event to take photos with proper cameras and they post it online, it's going to be good for your own marketing. Not everybody understands that. And then in some places, they've got security concerns. So it might be a place like a bank close by where you can understand that they might not want you taking photos of the bank with the big camera, with the big lens, because there could be issues. There could also be, it could, like places like restaurants with kids' playgrounds and things, they might not allow it, also for obvious reasons. Why is cell phones allowed? I don't know. It doesn't really make sense because cell phones these days are good cameras by themselves. But I guess you can't really tell people not to have a cell phone with them. And they sort of see cell phone photography as not professional, just like for your own use. Where as soon as somebody sees a big camera, they like, this must be professional. Yeah. But I think there are quite a few venues and places that are actually realizing that allowing people to do proper photography is good. The one thing that I do know about some of these venues that I've been doing street photography at is sometimes they would have a rule like, if anything touches the floor, it's a commercial shoot. So if I'm walking around with a small camera around my neck with one lens on it, they will assume it's personal use or whatever, street photography or something. But as soon as I put a light stand down or a tripod down, they're going to say, oh, you're doing a professional shoot for somebody, there's a client paying, we're losing out on money, you need a permit, you need to pay. And that I can also understand. You can't just go to somebody else's venue or property and have maybe a makeup artist and a photographer and an assistant and a model and everybody standing there in the way of people trying to walk through the venue. So there comes a point where you need a permit at some places to shoot. I think where people draw the lines are sometimes doesn't make sense. But yeah, we have to we have to talk to the correct people, I think. Also, some security guards in places, I've just seen that they've gotten an instruction that people with big cameras aren't allowed. They don't know why. They don't know the distinction between a professional corporate shoot or something that there's a client paying versus somebody walking around with a camera just capturing images. So yeah, sometimes it's for me it's usually not worth arguing. I generally don't argue in those cases. I just comply with whatever they want. I might just like have a friendly chat to somebody and say like, why are you saying this? Is it your manager saying this, or what's the reason? Just to try and figure out. Sometimes afterwards, like the next day or something, I might send an email to a place and just ask clarity on what the rules are and why the rules are there. What do I need to shoot somewhere? Do I need permission? Do I need a permit? Is it not allowed? Yeah, I don't think it's worth picking a fight in the moment with somebody who's just trying to do their job. That's my feeling on it. But I definitely feel that sometimes it's worth taking it up with management the next day in an email or a phone call or something, just to figure out yeah, what's happening. So next one, Joburg CBD walk sounds amazing. Yes, they usually are. Joburg CBD is really good. If Mark is there, we need to organize something. We haven't had one in a while, I think, but I love going there. And yeah, Joburg CBD, definitely, it's worth doing. Any other questions? Any other observations? Any other, whatever you're thinking about right now with street portraits or anything else you need to know? Just pop your question in the chat. Just going to give it a couple of seconds. Just check WhatsApp as well. Sometimes some people pop the questions into the WhatsApp. All good. Looks like we're good to go. Everybody happy? I hope this was interesting. I try not to get into too many of the like really technical details, but you're welcome to ask any of those questions if you want like technical answers to something, settings or gear or anything like that. You can ask it here in the chat, or you can just ask it in the WhatsApp group. So the WhatsApp group for this training, I'm happy to answer any questions there. Oh, thanks. I was getting a comment about the background. I was playing around with some things in Photoshop that I wanted to experiment with and thought I would do something different. So, good. Looks like everybody's happy. Thank you for joining. It's my pleasure. I'm glad you're happy. Glad you enjoyed it. Glad you hopefully learned something. Good. Like I said, anytime during the week, I'm definitely available on the WhatsApp group as well. Just ask any questions you want answered. Cool. Good. Looks like everybody's happy. Then we're going to call it an evening. Have a great week. Have a great evening. Yeah, get out and try some street portraits. Try some street photography. If yeah, anytime. It's my pleasure, Oscar. Have a good evening. Thank you, everybody. Cheers.